Well, thanks for having me. It's been a couple months ago, almost a couple months, that Marty asked me if I would tell my story, and he understood this is way out of my comfort zone. There's, like a lot of people, there's few things I would, can't think of a whole lot worse than getting up in front of a crowd. But this year has been a real year of stretching for me in a lot of ways. And I see this as one more, of not that I'm going to start public speaking, but that God has something I think He wants to say, and He's going to push it through me. So I spent about the first 3 months of my life in a nursery and an orphanage. I thought it was interesting to hear John's story, and that he started out something like that, although his was wild, to be found at 3 years old in a marketplace and not even to know your background. I was adopted. My birth name was William Paul Bibelhausen. Figure that one out, huh? But I was adopted by Al and Ida Faustin when I was almost 3 months old. And they were an older couple. My mother, one of the things she most wanted in life was to be a mother, and she could not have children. So adoption provided a way for her to be a mother. She had a lot of health problems, so one of the big memories as a child growing up was her being in the hospital a lot of surgeries, kind of mysterious things, a lot of poor health. But I was raised in a good home, parents who loved me. It was a Catholic home. I went to Catholic school all of my life until my junior year in high school, where I was going to Mullen. Have you heard of Mullen? Well, it's one of these, I can't imagine how much my dad was spending to send me there. And I got kicked out in my junior year of high school. So now, it's one of those things as you get older, there's so many things you see that you should have been thankful for. And the education my dad had hoped that I would get, I really squandered in a lot of ways. Although the good thing about having been at Mullen for 2 years is it's a college preparatory school, so they really push you academically. So when I got into public school, I was able to coast for 2 years, and I graduated. So I'm thankful to Mullen for all those credits I had built up, and thankful for getting through school. So my mom died when I was 15 years old, and about that same time I was becoming fascinated with drugs, anything to do with drugs, legal or illegal. Marijuana was like my primary thing, but I would do anything else I could get my hands on. And so the next 2 years, that was pretty much my life. There was a period of time where it was a little harder to get things. And then as time went on, I found better supplies. I started selling, which was nice because then I had a steady supply and I paid for my own. I didn't have to work, and I always had money in my pocket. So that was my life. And graduated from high school, had a pretty much wasted summer. And then as I got towards the end of the summer, my dad started pushing me to get a job. So I started looking in the newspaper and thinking, what is the easiest thing I could do? And I found this job at a greenhouse, which grew carnations. So I started working there. And it was a month or so into that, I think, that I came across a girl who we got to know each other, and she was interested in my drug supply. So I started selling to her. And then it was on a Sunday afternoon, October 14th, 1973, that I was talking to her on the phone. And as I remember, we were going to work on another deal. And she had been a Christian and fallen away. And the thing I remember of our conversation that afternoon, as she was telling me, she had been talking to some of her friends, and she said, You can't do drugs and know Jesus. And that's what was happening in her life. And we finished our conversation, and my afternoon went on. I probably continued on with my normal habits. And then it was that evening, around 7 o'clock, that I was in my bedroom and I was stoned and life was going on. But Jesus showed up. And there was a challenge. That challenge, you can't do drugs and know Jesus. Because, see, I was a good Catholic boy. I knew all the rules, and I kept the rules. I knew what mortal sins were that would send you to hell. And I knew what venial sins were. And I had it all figured out. I went to church every Sunday. I would go to confession and take care of those big things that may send me to hell if I happen to die. But all of a sudden, there was that challenge, and my life as I knew it was going to change. So, mysteriously, by the power of the Holy Spirit, something happened, and I said, okay, I'm not sure what this means, but I'll follow you. And I remembered in the other room where our books were, there was a New Testament. When I got kicked out of Catholic school and started going to public school, my dad said, well, I needed to go to catechism classes, which are what Catholics have for kind of supplementary religious education. So at the church near us, I started going to a class, and it was on Revelation. And the priest who was teaching the class on Revelation was teaching astral projection. And somehow astral projection came out of the 7 churches in the beginning of Revelation. And so there was more of my Catholic education. But anyway, I had that New Testament left over. So I went and got it, and I started reading. And I woke up the next morning, and I went to work. And I wanted to tell people I've decided to become a Christian. I still didn't know quite what that meant. So the girl who I had talked to that afternoon, she was trying to get her life back together. She invited me to church. I started going with her to a place called Redeemer Temple, which at that time in early 1973, there was 2 things happening in that church. One was the charismatic renewal, and the other was the Jesus movement. So you had all of these hippies who were becoming Christians, and the church was full of them. It was also full of a lot of people from mainline denominations who were becoming a part of the charismatic renewal, and it was a kind of an interesting mix. So I started going to Redeemer, and a couple weeks later, the world pulled her back in, and that was kind of the last I saw of her, although I kept going to church with her mother. And then after a while I started driving myself, but life was different. Well, it was a couple months later I started a carpentry apprenticeship. That's something I'd signed up for during the summer, and you got to wait a while before you get into the program. So during the day I was doing carpentry work, and a week or two, or a night or two a week, I had classes. And then around the same time, I got involved in a Christian coffee house called Daniel's Den, which was in southwest Denver on the corner of Federal and Evans. And there was a shopping center across the street called Brentwood, where the big thing going on at that time was people cruising around the shopping center. So there were tons of young people hanging out on the weekends, and some people from a church nearby got a vision to open up a coffee house right across from this place, and to have Christian bands come in on Friday and Saturday nights, and there was a Bible study on Monday. So somehow, I don't even know how it happened, I got involved in Daniel's Den, and I started going there, and pretty soon I was on the staff there. And after, I think it was a year or so, maybe a little longer, I had the opportunity to go full-time, which I think consisted of spending all my time there, and I think I got $100 a month. So I convinced my dad that quitting carpentry was a good idea. I wanted to be in the ministry, and I think he knew by then this is a pretty stubborn kid. Why fight him? And so with his sort of blessing, I took that direction and was working at Daniel's Den full time. Well, in 1978, I got married to Wendy. We met at Daniel's Den, although I knew her from Redeemer. At Redeemer at that time, in the early 70s, if you wanted to get a seat, you had to come early. So I'd get there about an hour early because I loved front row, that seat right there. And Wendy would sit over here, although she usually showed up about 10, 15 minutes late. So the service would be going, and there she'd come down the aisle and find her seat next to her friends. So I was aware of her, but I didn't really know her from there. But we got to know each other at Daniel's Den, started hanging around, and 6 months after we got serious, we got married. And that was coincidentally 5 years after I became a Christian, October 14th, 1978. So I figured out how to remember my anniversary. That's the day I became a Christian. So it was about a year later. She got pregnant during that year, but it was in October of 1979 that we had babies that were, or a baby, as far as we knew, that she was 5 months along. And her water broke, so we went into the doctor. You know, we were a couple young kids who knew nothing. And he said, well, he sent us over to the hospital to get checked out. And he said, we're going to find out how many babies are in there. So I guess she was much bigger than she should have been, although we had no clue. And it came kind of quick. We found out later it was something called polyhydramnios, which there's too much fluid. And it's usually related to some other problems. So we got into the hospital, and at that point there was not much they could do to stop the labor. And a couple days later, twin boys were born at 5 months, and they were born dead. So that was kind of a difficult thing, but especially being a young husband, I didn't have a clue about all these kind of things. I knew nothing about grieving, and even at that time, you know, they came in after the babies were born, and you know, it may have been minutes later, and you know, told us, well, they could take care of them. And we signed the papers, and that was the last we ever saw of those little boys. I found out years later there was a whole lot of stuff that was left undone, especially in her. A lot of grieving that needed to be done. So anyway, time went on, and it was a little while later, saw an article in a Christian magazine we got, and it was like, are you willing to help the poor, you know, do some other things and live on $35 a month? Well, having made $100 a month at Daniel's Den, 35, you know, that's not bad. So anyway, we checked into this thing, and you know, we were a young couple who was willing to do anything to follow the Lord, and kind of radical, crazy. And so this sounded like an adventure. So we signed up for this program, and we had some medical bills that we had to pay off. And I'll make a longer story short, but I had a janitorial business that I started a month or two before we got married, which was kind of an interesting provision from God, which a lot has happened like that in my life, where I'm not a very forward-looking person. You know, I hear about people with like 5-year plans, and you know, that's like way beyond me. You know, if I've got a 2-hour plan, you know, I'm doing pretty good. But anyway, God brought this business along doing subcontract janitorial work, which was a great business. So, I was doing that when we got married. And anyway, so we signed up for this program to go. And it was a thing called the Mennonite Voluntary Service. And I knew nothing really about the Mennonites or what this program was about. But we signed up and we were accepted. And we ended up going to the Hopi Indian Reservation in Arizona. And there was a church there in a town called Munkapi, which was actually surrounded by the Navajo Reservation. It's across the highway from a place called Tuba City, Arizona. It's kind of, I think, about 75 miles kind of northwest of Flagstaff. And there was a church there that had been found in the early 1900s by Mennonite missionaries. And they needed a pastor for that church. And imagine this, I become the pastor of that church. And, at that time in my Christian life, if you wanted to go in full-time ministry, it's kind of like, well, you're going to become a pastor or a missionary, kind of thing. And, that was the aspiration of, that was kind of the ultimate in our minds, of we wanted to be sold out for Jesus, so we're going to do something like that, going to be a missionary or some kind of thing. I had read the story of the 5 missionaries that were killed in Ecuador, Jim Elliot, read their stories, and I was just fascinated by that and had decided, I'm going to become a missionary. So in keeping with my forward thinking, I had no idea how that would come about, but as far as I knew, you would just head off to some country and become a missionary kind of thing. Well, anyway, so we head off to Arizona. Oh, I was saying, we had a janitorial business that we were doing together, and we had been accepted by this program, and the only thing holding us back is we had some debts we had to pay still, some hospital bills. So we were paying those off, and it was like as soon as that was done, we were going to head out. Well, one night, on the windshield of our cars, I hauled the trash out of the building, went to the car, I would load it up on the car, drive around to the trash can. It was pouring rain, and I turn on the windshield wipers and there's something flopping back and forth, so I stop and get it, and it's an envelope. And I look in it and it's full of money. So I closed it, set it on the seat, dumped the trash, brought it back in. And I found Wendy, and there was this guy that was there who was the overnight computer operator. And she was talking to him, and I show this envelope, and we'd been witnessing to him. And I open this up and pull it out and start counting, and it was $100 bills, and it was like either $1,000 or $1,200, which was the exact amount we needed to pay off our bills. And I'm counting it out, and this guy's watching, and he says, "I think that was supposed to be on my windshield." And it was like, this was a miraculous moment. And there was a note in that we still have, although you can hardly read it because it was wet from the rain. And it said something like, "This is so you will not be held back, and you can go." And, that job was our last job of the night. We had probably 5-6 hours of work. And, it's one of those things you start trying to think, okay, who did this? And it's like none of our friends knew, our jobs or where they were. And it's like if you're going to do something like that, why not stick it on the first job? So finally we concluded, we're not supposed to know. Maybe it was angels. But it was definitely God. And He was sending us off to the Hopi Reservation. And so everything we had at that point, we started giving away, because our plan was we were going to go there and probably when we were done there, head off to Ecuador to be missionaries or something. So we don't need anything we have. So the only things we took with us is what would fit in a car, a rental car that we rented with a friend drove us down. We unloaded everything we had. She drove back, and we started our new life. Well, we soon found out that the people who were part of this program, the Mennonites, at least this branch of the Mennonites, were very liberal. And we soon found out that their vision for a church and our vision for a church as radical, very far from liberal evangelical Christians was very different. So I got myself fired after 3 months being the pastor of that church. So we came back to Denver, we met with the pastors of our church, and it's like, did we miss God? And it's like, no, we kind of concluded with them we didn't. And I always looked back and I thought, his provision and things like that kind of helped to know he sent us there. His plan was much different than the plan, especially that I had formulated in my mind of what our future was. So they gave us some money to live there. There was a missionary couple that we had known that we moved in with them. They had a camper that we moved into, and we spent some time trying to figure out, is God going to open a door here, or is it done? So anyway, after 3 months, the money was running out. We finally concluded it's time to go home. So we did, and a couple months later, my oldest daughter was born. This was 1981. And Phil, my oldest son, was born a couple years after that. And then every couple years after that, we had another child. So we had 5 kids, which brings us up to about March 1994, when Wendy was pregnant with another child. And it was several weeks before he was due to be born that she said, he's not moving. So we go to the doctor and they do the ultrasound, and we find out that this boy has died. So this time we did it a little better than with our first boys who died. And it was a very difficult time because we had a friend who was, I could deviate here into a much longer story too, from the doctor. Well, we had a midwife who was going to deliver the baby. And actually, our kids had been born at home. I forgot to say that. And this baby was going to be born at home too. We had a doctor who was the backup if there was any trouble. We met with him, and but we ended up, there was a friend of ours who was an OBGYN who ended up delivering the baby. We met with him, and he did the ultrasound and all, and that's when we found out the baby was dead. And he said we could induce labor or we could wait a couple days for labor to come on itself. He said usually it's better if it goes that way, although it's more difficult for the mother. So we decided to wait. So a couple days passed. That gave us a little time to get used to what was going on. And also in God's provision, we had a friend who had a cemetery and mortuary. And he came alongside of us and helped us start making plans for a funeral and a burial. And so in this couple-day period, I decided I was going to build a casket. And the boys and I went to the store, and we bought wood, and we built a casket, a small casket. And the girls went to the store and bought fabric, and we covered this, and we made this little casket for our baby. And he was then born in the hospital, which was a very difficult day. And after he was born, the kids came, and we spent a few hours holding him and saying goodbye. But we did a better job of of starting that grieving process. So then we had a funeral for this little boy. So life went on. We had 3 more kids born, which, if you're counting, that brings the number to 8. I've got 6 boys and 2 girls. My youngest is 10. I've got 2 daughters who aren't doing well at all. I've got a son who is kind of hanging in the balance. So that kind of makes life difficult. Well, anyway, in 1984, backing up a little, I went from the janitorial business to a friend of mine had a handyman business and invited me to join him, which was a great idea because at that time there was Jessica and Philip, and life was kind of changing. You know, before that, our schedule was kind of upside down of the world. You know, I worked at night, and then we all slept in the day. Everybody was on the same schedule. You know, a lot of people who have a night job like that, things are kind of messed up, and the families live in one schedule, and, you know, but we actually did pretty well that way where, you know, we just lived on this different schedule. But as the kids were growing up a little older, it was kind of getting a little more difficult to live that way. So again, it was God's provision to bring along this business that I could join in with. And so I started with my friend, and it was a year or so later that he ended up heading off to Kansas to become a pastor of a church. So I was left alone in that business, and I've done it ever since 1984. So it's a business with a great potential. I have a good hourly rate. I could make a lot of money, but due to my laziness, I haven't done very well with it. I've squandered a lot of the opportunity that could be with that business. Also, fear has kept me back. You know, every day I work just about, I get people who pat me on the back, who are so thankful for the work I do, who tell me what a great job I do. I have tons of testimonials that I get from people saying what a great job. But as a lot of men, I never feel competent. I'm always waiting for things to go bad, and people are going to find out what a fraud I am, and I really don't know. You know, one of my fears is working for friends, because I always think I'm going to screw it up somehow, and then everybody's going to know I don't know what I'm doing. So I was talking about stretching this year, and it's kind of interesting, some of the things with my work too, that God has really taken me out of my comfort zone and helped me stretch a lot in my business as well. But if you're a friend, don't ask me to work for you. So I've had really great health most of my life too, except for skin cancer has been something that for somewhere around 10 years has been just ongoing. I'm finally getting used to it, that, you know, every year or so I'm going to end up with a surgery. The kind I have is basal cell, which, you know, isn't like a life-threatening thing like melanoma, but it's something you got to deal with. But so I go into the dermatologist every few months, and they freeze tons of spots on my head, trying to keep them from turning cancerous, and look for the things that need to be cut off and that sort of thing. So I'm getting used to that battle. So I mentioned Wendy, my wife. Most of our marriage, she stayed home. The first, she worked with me before we had kids, doing janitorial work. And then she worked with me when our daughter Jessica was small, until she started crawling. Before that, we would take her to work with us and put her on a blanket or something, and we'd be running around doing the work and checking on her. And then all of a sudden, when she became mobile, it's like, well, that wasn't going to work. So Wendy started staying home, and okay, so I couldn't argue with that. You know, it was years later that I wished I had known some of the things I knew now and let her be a homemaker and a mother, even in those early years, because she was one of those women who all she ever wanted from a young child was to be a mother and a wife. And I kind of looked at it like, well, I enjoy being with you. You got nothing else going on, you might as well be at work with me. But I realized later there was a lot of things she could have been doing at home. She could have been practicing those homemaking skills and just enjoying being a mother and enjoying being a wife who was at home cooking, anticipating her husband coming home or cleaning or whatever. She's also a homeschooler. She's homeschooled 5 kids from birth, basically, through high school, and that's quite an accomplishment. You think teenagers are having bad? Wait till you have homeschooled teenagers. So anyway, she's done an amazing job. We still have 3 kids at home that are still going through school. My youngest is 10, so we've got a ways to go, and she does. In 1989, I got involved with a pro-life ministry called Operation Rescue, who, if that name rings a bell at all, if you go back to 1989, we were a major news item across the country because we were doing abortion clinic blockades where we would show up in an abortion clinic, we would block the doors, and it's like, you can haul us off, but we're not leaving, and nobody's dying while we're here. So we did that kind of thing. We went to jail. The federal government passed a federal law called the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances that made it a federal crime to blockade the entrance of an abortion clinic. And all of a sudden, if you'd say the price went up, and you were looking at federal fines and prison time for doing that. So we modified our tactics a little and continued on with that ministry since then. What we do primarily now is we have a twice a week or 2 different abortion clinics we pick it at. It would be like 4 different days a week. We also do a thing in the spring and fall where we go to local high schools and pass out pro-life literature on the sidewalk. Of course, we're not welcome in most of the schools, so if they could keep us off the sidewalk, they would. We'll be starting that project up again here in in a couple weeks or so, I think the week after Labor Day, and we'll go through September and October. So if you're interested in any of that stuff, talk to me and I can give you details on what we do. I mentioned Phil, my son, my oldest son. If you don't know, he leads worship for the youth. And Phil is one of those worship leaders who understands what it's all about. It's not about the music, it's not about him, it's not about us. It's about God. And he's an incredibly gifted musician, son, worship leader. I'm proud to have him as my son, and I can also say I've basically had nothing to do with it because music is not my thing. I cannot do anything with music. My other son Josiah plays drums, so you've probably seen him up front. And actually a band he's in is playing their first concert this afternoon at a church outreach, so that's kind of cool. We've been to some different churches in our journey. Most of our experiences have been good, although we've had a few that aren't so good. One of my hard lessons is to find out pastors are not perfect people. They're messed up just like the rest of us, sometimes more so. One of the more difficult things for pastors is, I think, who do you talk to about it? Can you tell what's really going on in your life? And I think that makes one of the difficult things for pastors. Speaking of pastors, does the name Ted Haggard ring a bell to anybody? Well, this week I was listening to a message that was played on Focus on the Family that Ted Haggard originally delivered in his church. I'm not sure the date on it. It's been quite a while back. But he tells the story of he had just been involved in a situation with another pastor where he had to go back to another place and deal with a situation where a pastor had been involved in adultery. And then the next day on Focus on the Family, they talked about this epidemic of what was going on. And so you think about Ted Haggard and you think, everything he said on that was right on. He knew what to do. Interestingly, he was involved in the beginnings or the ongoing of his stuff that brought him down during this time. Sometimes you may think, well, he was just a huge hypocrite. He was a fake. Or he didn't know what he needed to do, but he knew all the answers, or maybe it was something else. I'm going to play a story of another pastor that I want you to see, and then I've got a few other things to say.
I thought that the day my story came out, my ministry would be over. Turns out that's the day it started. Reputation was everything for me. I set out to build a good reputation and to protect it, which meant that there were parts of my life that I couldn't let anybody see. There were some battles I had to fight alone. I got my first look at hardcore pornography on a seminary-sponsored trip to New York City. My wife was with me. They took us on a tour of Times Square so that we could see firsthand how women are exploited by the sex business. I was shocked by what I saw and disgusted by it. But I was also fascinated. It hit me, hooked me deep. I didn't just like porn. I became obsessed with it. And it eventually took me places I never intended to go. So before I know it, I'm a pastor, married, 3 kids, and I'm picking up my first hooker on my way to lead a candlelight service on Christmas Eve. I only lasted 5 years in the ministry. I was never caught, but I was terrified of losing my reputation. My life was out of control. I'd lost any hope that I could stop what I was doing, so I bailed on the ministry, went into business, succeeded in business. But that's about the only thing I succeeded at. Those were dark years. My life got smaller and smaller. I hated what I was doing. I remember so many times screaming at God as I pulled away from some place I shouldn't have been, banging on the steering wheel, saying, "Take this away, I don't want to do this anymore." He never answered that prayer. Eventually I concluded that either he didn't care or he didn't exist. Today I'm so glad he didn't answer that prayer. I think we're all made for intimacy. But intimacy carries its risks. People can reject us. People can disappear. They can die. Pornography offers this artificial intimacy with no risks. So every day I said hello to the woman who wouldn't laugh at me or who found me attractive, engaging. and every day I gave a piece of myself away. It left me emptier and hungrier every time, and yet I kept coming back. I was oblivious to what it was doing to my wife until one day she caught me. I don't know how long she'd been standing there, but she was crying. And so I apologized and we talked it through, and I was still afraid. A few days later, she found a condom on the floor in the bathroom that I couldn't quite explain. This time, she didn't cry. She sat me down on the edge of our bed and she said, "I'm done. I still love you, but I don't like you. I don't trust you. I don't respect you. And I don't believe you can ever change." That's what it took for me to get out of my private world. Living in the truth, walking in the light, no matter how other people might perceive it. I mean, that's freedom. And to know that I don't have to perform to be accepted. I always felt bad that I wasn't a better person. I even created this false self, this Saint Nate that I tried to make breathe on its own. I felt bad that Saint Nate could only live at church. Now I know that Jesus never loved Saint Nate, because he didn't make Saint Nate. He made me. Jesus loves me, wants a relationship with me. And that's the only real relationship there is. There's a tremendous liberty when you arrive in a place that's safe enough to bring your real self and say the real truth. There were men who did that for me, Christian men. And I found that I could give the same gift to another guy. Sit down over a cup of coffee and just tell him my story. And even if his life is different from mine, and everybody's life is different from mine in the details, something about my story resonated with his. And so many times, by the time we finished, he'd say, "Well, you know, I've never told anybody this, but he got a taste of freedom too." Because of my addiction, I now understand that only God is the center of things. He's actually used my addiction for good. Because of it, I've been forced to join the human race and surrender to a power greater than myself. God is good. God is love. And if I'll follow the path that He's laid out for me, I can live every day in the warmth of His love, and I can reflect it to others. I don't think I ever really met Jesus until I stepped out of my church persona and became just another desperate, broken man. That's when He really became real to me. This isn't the ministry I planned, but I know it's mine. And my wife knows it too. We're in it together. My wife will tell you today that she's been married to two guys named Nate Larkin. And as hard as those first 20 years were, she'd take him again to get the last 10. I'm Nate Larkin, and I am second.
The thing I really identify with on that is a desperate, broken man. As Nate said, his story is different than a lot of people. My story is different than his. but it's similar in many ways. Nate wrote this book, Samson and the Pirate Monk, started something called the Samson Society, which I've been a part of for the last 4 years. You know, I think each of us has areas we do well in, and we've got areas where over and over, whatever it is, we've got that thing that just keeps coming back, dragging us down. Maybe something like he talked about, or it may be something completely different. I used to live under this illusion of Christian maturity, that of what that meant, but it seems like my life is more like an onion. You know, it's layer after layer of darkness I find being exposed. A lot of years I lived under the illusion of what I was. But I'm finding out more, there's a lot of junk in my life that I never faced up to. And the fruits of that are becoming apparent in my life. I want to tell you a little about the Samson Society. Like I said, I've been apart for 4 years. About 4 years ago, I saw an article in a magazine that mentioned it, and it's like, what is this? I looked it up, found out there was this book, and I got a copy of it. I read it. I was fascinated. I gave it to Phil. He read it, and it's like, let's do this. You know, let's start a Samson Society. And DenverSamsonSociety.com, you can find out about it. We're going to pass out some brochures at the end here. Got some cards and a CD of a message that Nate gave. Nate is I think Samson started back, well, this is 2004, the message, so it was just kind of starting rolling a little before then. But so there's various resources to tell you more in detail of what it's about. At this point, we meet on Friday nights in the library here. 7 o'clock, we meet for about an hour, then we go to dinner after. And going to a Samson meeting is sometimes the most terrifying thing you'll ever do in your life, because the question comes up, can I really be real? Can I really tell what is going on in my life? And it won't be fodder at church the next Sunday, or I won't get kicked out of the men's ministry, or I won't be put on probation, or people won't be in shock. So it's a place that I practice truth-telling, confession. I learn what it's like to tell the truth in a safe environment amongst other men who are desperate and broken. And we stand arm in arm helping each other. It's not an accountability group, you know, a place where you go and people check up on you. It's got to be a voluntary thing. I have to be the one who is willing to tell the truth, because even in Samson, I can play the game as so many of us know how to play if I want, or I can push myself to tell the truth. So you're welcome to come. You can see, like I said, in the information and online kind of a little more about it. You can even see what a meeting is all about. There's a format. So I'm just about running out of time. But I was thinking, you know, it seems like there are problems we will talk about sometimes in our life. You know, if pressed, we'll name a big problem. But under the surface, there is the big problem, you know, that thing. I've got a bunch of them. One that I've been able to deal with this last year is losing weight. In the last year, I lost 70 pounds. That's been an incredible journey. It was something that, you know, I used to think of myself as a pretty disciplined person. You know, I get up in the morning, I do my Bible reading, I pray for people. But it always kind of bugged me that there were certain things in my life that I would think of, like need to lose weight, and it was like there was an area I didn't even want to think about because I didn't have a clue how I was going to do anything about that. But it was actually through Samson, as I made the confession, I know I need to lose weight, and a series of things happened that put a path before me that helped make it possible. So some of my big problems at this point, one is isolation. I love being a loner. I do well by myself, but I do horrible by myself. Samson has pushed me to open my life to other people. I can be a very lazy person. I'm a very angry person. I'm a very selfish person. Procrastination, when I gave in to Marty to stand up here and talk, well, there was these dates. Well, the farthest away date was August 28th, so that was as far out as I could push it, so I picked August 28th. Let's procrastinate as far as we can. My mouth is one of my biggest problems. I don't like to be in front of a group, but my mouth has gotten me in trouble many times. And so these issues, those things I just mentioned, are things that I've carried my life. I've carried them in my marriage. I've carried them in my fathering. And there are fruits that have grown out of those, many that I've ignored. There are blossoms on the tree now. There is fruit falling off the tree. And I've got a lot of work to do. I've got a lot of rebuilding to do in my marriage, damage I have done. The place we're at that is not good, that a lot has to do with the way I have lived my life, the way I have not lived my life. So that's my story. Phil, would you pass those things out? Please take one of these and look the stuff over. I guess if we press it, there's a couple minutes for questions. And feel free to ask me anything, any other time as well. I'm trying to make my life an open book at this point. Any questions you've got, or? I was going to play something at the end, but I kind of talked along. Maybe Sylvan can throw it on the DVD. It's a retreat that's coming up called the 48 Hours of Frankness. There's the web address there. And it's put on by some guys of the Samson Society. It's October 21st through the 23rd. And it's an intensive time. If you look at this material and think I'm ready to dive in headlong, then you may want to check out the 48 Hours of Frankness. If you look at that site, you'll find out more details on it. Well, the last thing I want to say, I kind of skipped over. I mentioned Ted Haggard and the pastor that he went to talk to, and kind of an interesting story. The guy's name was Ed Gunger, which may mean nothing. Have you heard the name Gunger, anyone? Beautiful Things, Michael Gunger and his band. Beautiful Things is playing on the radio now. We've sung it in church. Last week we sang a song called We Will Run. Well, Ed Gunger was the pastor. Michael Gunger was his son. And if you listen to this music and his other stuff, you will find such incredible messages of redemption, what God wants to do. And I thought, isn't it interesting, from such a horrible situation, thankfully that marriage was saved, a ministry was restored, a son with incredible gifts was able to go on and do incredible things. And that's for each of us, our lives, from all the junk that we've got now, God can make beautiful things. Well, thanks a lot for giving me this time. And I guess we probably ought to stop. So, I've got a couple copies of the book. If you're interested, I'd be glad to loan those to you too. So feel free to grab one of those. Thanks.